Hey everybody. I thought I'd try something a little different for today's episode, so if you're here to see me sarcastically make fun of an old cult movie, you're out of luck because that's not what I'm doing. Instead, I'd like to pay tribute to a guy who had a big influence not just on me, but on a ton of people young and old, Ray Harryhausen. So for those of you that don't know, Ray Harryhausen was an animator who specialized in stop-motion animation, which is the art of taking a flexible model and painstakingly moving it frame by frame to create the illusion of movement. Now, without going into too much detail, let's just say that the guy was kind of like the Muhammad Ali of his craft. That is to say, the greatest there ever was and probably ever will be. In a career lasting more than 30 years, he created some of the greatest movie monsters in history, from dinosaurs to mythological creatures to space aliens. Very few people can claim to be the best in the world at what they do, but for a time, Ray Harryhausen definitely could. In fact, to my knowledge, he's the only special effects guy to become the star of his films. When you watch one of his movies, you don't care who the director is or who the actors are. No, you're watching a Ray Harryhausen movie. And the guy's influence has been huge. Everybody from Steven Spielberg to Peter Jackson to James Cameron lists him as a reason why they started making movies. And this is just one of the reasons why he's remembered as so much more than just a special effects technician. Now, of course, being a Monster Vision kid, watching a lot of cable TV growing up, I was really familiar with Harryhausen's work from a really young age. I mean, I basically grew up on the guy's movies. So when I heard that he passed away a little while ago, I knew that I wanted to do something special. I thought, well, I could feature one of his movies, I could list what my favorite monsters of his were, I could do like a little mini bio or something like that. But then I thought, well, why don't I just cut right to the chase? What are the movies of his that I like the most? So without further ado, here are my top 10 best Ray Harryhausen films. Number 10. 1 Million Years BC. This movie was produced by Britain's Hammer Studios, who are best known for their gothic horror movies featuring Dracula and Frankenstein, so this is an example of one of their forays into science fiction. Well, okay, it's mostly fiction and pretty light on the science part, since it's about cavemen and dinosaurs coexisting at the same time, so historical accuracy isn't this movie's strong suit, but hey, if it worked on the Flintstones, I guess it can work here. The plot is about a caveman named Tumac who gets exiled from his tribe and is forced to fend for himself. Eventually he gets found by Luana, played by Raquel Welch, and is taken in by her tribe. The two fall in love, have various encounters with dinosaurs, and yeah, that's pretty much the whole plot. As you can probably tell, the story isn't very complex, but it doesn't need to be. The real attractions are Raquel Welch's figure and Harryhausen's dinosaurs, and the movie does a good job of telling the story through action rather than dialogue. Which is good, since most of the dialogue is just the characters saying each other's names.
Tumac, Luana.
Even if you haven't heard of this movie, I'm guessing you've probably seen this poster of Raquel Welch. After all, it was in The Shawshank Redemption. Well, here's the movie that the poster's from. This has got to be one of the only times in film history where a movie's poster is more famous than the actual movie. By the way, recognize any of these background shots? One pet peeve I have is that the first dinosaur they show isn't even a dinosaur. It's just an iguana that's been made to look big. This is like one of those cheap old movies where they glue fins onto lizards and pretend they were dinosaurs. You hire Ray Harryhausen to do your effects and this is the first thing you show? Who the hell thought that was a good idea? Fortunately though, Ray handles the rest of the effects in the movie, and at the time, these were some of the best dinosaurs anybody had ever seen. My favorite part is the fight between the Triceratops and the Ceratosaurus. It's anachronistic as hell, but damn is it awesome. This is one of the more esoteric movies Harryhausen was involved with, and I realize that a lot of people aren't going to be into a movie where the characters don't even really talk, but the way I figure it, you got dinosaurs animated by Ray Harryhausen and Raquel Welch in a fur bikini, life is good. Number 9. Clash of the Titans. By the early 80s, the success of Star Wars had resulted in a boom of sci-fi and fantasy movies, and special effects technology had taken a huge leap forward. So by this time, Harryhausen's techniques were starting to look a little bit dated compared to other movies. Not only that, but the types of fantasy movies Ray specialized in were starting to go out of fashion in favor of more gritty movies like Conan the Barbarian. As a result, this was the last movie Harryhausen made before retiring, and what better way to go out than with a good old-fashioned fantasy epic based on Greek mythology. The god Zeus has an affair with a mortal woman and produces a son, Perseus, who grows up to become an impeccably coiffed Harry Hamlin. Perseus ends up falling in love with the princess Andromeda, but in order to marry her, he has to answer a riddle. If he gets it wrong, he gets burned at the stake. It's a little harsh, don't you think?
Andromeda is very beautiful.
Yeah, if that's the risk you take to marry her, she better be. But Perseus succeeds, and soon the two are to be married. However, during the wedding, Andromeda's mother says that she's more beautiful than the goddess Thetis, and wouldn't you know it, Thetis appears and demands that Andromeda be sacrificed to the Kraken, or else the entire city will be destroyed. You know, for all-powerful beings, the gods are sure an insecure bunch. So it's up to Perseus to go on a quest to obtain the head of Medusa so he can use it to destroy the Kraken. This movie had the biggest budget of any Harryhausen film, so the filmmakers were able to get a cast of well-known veteran actors to be in it like Laurence Olivier, Maggie Smith, Ursula Andress, and even Burgess Meredith as a poet who helps Perseus out.
And the destruction of Argus. Why, it's been a most popular story here for the past 20 years. I myself wrote a poem about it. It's rather moving, as I recall.
However, despite the high-profile cast, most of them really aren't in the movie that much, and their roles are just kind of glorified cameos. This was also the only Harryhausen movie to have been made after Star Wars, and you can see some of the influence of that movie on this one. Probably the most obvious example of this is with the mechanical owl, Bubo. See if you can spot the resemblance to a certain other whistling robot.
Don't you call me a mindless philosopher, you overweight glob of grease?
Yeah, Bubo's sort of a love him or hate him character. I kinda lean towards the hate side just because he seems so out of place with the rest of the movie. Like they just had to fit in a cute robot no matter what. Fortunately, the rest of the movie focuses on classic Greek mythology with bickering gods, epic quests, and naturally, a ton of Harryhausen monsters. The best scene is the one with Medusa, which is done almost entirely in shadows. Rather than focusing on action, it instead focuses on atmosphere and building tension, and at times it has an almost horror movie vibe to it. It's interesting to contrast this movie with the 2010 remake to show the difference in approach to movies when they use CGI. In the original, even though they never really show all of the Kraken at once, I still have no trouble picturing the entire monster in my head. With the remake, I'm not really sure what the Kraken looks like. It's just kind of a twisted mass of tentacles and teeth. Also in the original, Medusa moved quite slowly and deliberately, which helped with the creepy atmosphere, but in the remake they have her whipping around like she's Speedy Gonzales. I guess they thought that if she was faster that would make her scarier, but mostly it just looks like she doesn't weigh anything. Seriously, look how fast she's moving. Overall, this movie's a little old-fashioned, even for the time it was made, but it's still a solid fantasy film. This may have been Ray's last movie, but he made sure to go out with a bang. Number 8. 20 Million Miles to Earth. In the 1950s, alien invasion movies were hugely popular, with square-jawed American heroes going up against vicious alien monsters. The problem is, most of these movies didn't get Harryhausen to do the effects, and as a result, a lot of the monsters looked like crap. Fortunately for us, Ray made some alien monster movies of his own. This movie definitely fits into that 50s monster movie mold in a lot of ways, but it's also got some unique qualities that help it to stand out. An American spaceship returning from Venus crashes into the ocean off the coast of Italy, which releases a strange capsule. The capsule contains an egg which soon hatches, releasing a strange alien creature. The creature is apparently known as the Emir, but it's never called that during the movie. When it first hatches, the monster's only a few inches tall, but it starts growing at a rapid pace. Pretty soon it's giant-sized and goes on a rampage in Rome. The main thing that helps this movie stand out from other monster movies of the time is the creature. Unlike other 1950s aliens that are purely evil and just want to take over the world, this one's more like a scared animal. It doesn't attack anybody until it's provoked, and just like in King Kong, you actually end up feeling sorry for it. It doesn't want to take over the world, it's just confused and wants to be left alone. As you can expect, Harryhausen does a great job with the animation on the creature. He really does make it a character in the film rather than just another monster, and this helps set it above all the other rubbery, goofy monsters of the time. Like a lot of 50s monster movies, the scenes with the people can get a little dull, but the monster and the climax where it goes on a rampage in Rome makes it totally worth it. Number 7. The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms. This was the first movie where Ray did the effects by himself, and is considered by many to have kickstarted the whole atomic monster movie craze of the 1950s. Atomic testing near the North Pole releases a giant prehistoric monster called a Radosaurus. Get it? Radosaurus. The monster then makes its way to New York and proceeds to go on a rampage. Now I know what some of you are probably thinking. That sounds awfully similar to the plot of Godzilla. Well, you'd be right, except for the fact that this movie was released in 1953, which is a whole year before Godzilla. In fact, word has it that this movie was actually one of the inspirations for Godzilla. Just imagine, if it hadn't been for this movie, there's a chance we might not have Godzilla, or even the entire Japanese giant monster genre in general. Regarding this movie, it's definitely one of the definitive American monster movies of the 50s, not only for Ray's animation but also for how influential it would end up being, but it's not without its problems. The biggest flaw with this movie is that it's a little slow to get going. A lot of the first half of the movie consists of scenes of people talking, and the monster doesn't even get to New York until more than 40 minutes in. Once it does though, it's totally worth it, as Ray gives us one of the all-time great monster rampages. It also has one of the best death scenes in history. Oh man, I fucking love that. The climax with the monster in Coney Island is also a highlight. Overall, The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms is definitely a flawed effort, and at this point Ray's technique was still in its early stages, but for 50s monster movie fans, it's a must-see. Now let's see that cop get eaten again. Oh yeah. Number 6. The Valley of Gwangi. The premise for this movie is simple. Cowboys and dinosaurs. Yeah, it's kinda like Cowboys and Aliens, except with a way better title. In turn-of-the-century Mexico, a traveling Wild West show discovers a tiny prehistoric horse that came from a hidden valley, which they hope to use as an attraction. However, an old gypsy woman says that the horse is bad luck and tries to return it to the valley. And when the members of the Wild West show follow it, they discover that the valley is full of dinosaurs, including an Allosaurus called Gwangi. They manage to capture Gwangi and bring him back to civilization to show him off as an attraction, so in a way the movie's kind of like a variation on King Kong. And just like in King Kong, Gwangi escapes and causes havoc, except instead of climbing a building, the finale takes place inside a cathedral. Just like with Beast from 20,000 Fathoms, this movie takes a little while to get going, and the dinosaurs don't really appear until about halfway through. Once they get to the Forbidden Valley, though, things really pick up. This is a movie that knows how to take its weird premise and just have fun with it, and we get scenes of cowboys trying to lasso and hogtie dinosaurs. This is also a Harryhausen film where one of his creations is also arguably one of the central characters, and even though Gwangi isn't as expressive and sympathetic as King Kong, he still manages to give him some character. This movie is prime Saturday matinee material. The premise is a bit unusual, but it works. And hey, if you can't have fun with cowboys and dinosaurs, what can you have fun with? Number 5. Mysterious Island. This one's based on a respected piece of literature, so if you're ever watching it and someone accuses you of watching too many monster movies, just say you're boning up on the classics. During the Civil War, a group of captured Union soldiers make an escape in a hot air balloon during a storm. However, they get blown off course and end up on an uncharted island in the Pacific. Later on, a couple of shipwrecked Englishwomen end up on the island as well. They try their best to survive on the island, but that's complicated by the fact that it's full of giant animals and monsters. Yeah, out of all the islands they could have landed on, it had to be the one with the giant monsters.
That's a mighty big crowd.
This movie's based off a novel by Jules Verne, who's most famous for writing 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, and it's actually kind of a sequel to that story since it features the character of Captain Nemo and his submarine, the Nautilus. He only shows up towards the end of the movie, though. The movie departs from the novel in a big way since in the book, there aren't any monsters. But screw that, giant monsters make any story better. There's giant bees, a prehistoric bird, and even a giant crab that Harryhausen supposedly animated using a real crab shell. Well, I guess that beats having to make one from scratch out of clay. Even though the monsters are great as usual, one thing that really helps set this movie apart from other Harryhausen films are the characters. In some Harryhausen movies, especially the early ones, most of the human characters are kind of bland, and they're really only there to string the animation sequences together. Here, they have more distinct personalities, and there's some good interaction between them.
We're here. 36 degrees south, 153 degrees west.
How interesting. Now I shall be able to say to my friends, do you know, Mr. Spilett, we ran into each other 36 degrees south, 150 degrees west. So much more intriguing than the usual places.
It's also got a great musical score by Bernard Herrmann, who's probably best known for doing the theme to Psycho. Some younger people may be put off by the fact that this movie is based off of such an old book, but like I said, giant monsters make everything better.
That's the best crab I ever cooked.
Number 4. Mighty Joyoung. Alright, I'm kinda cheating with this one since technically the effects were done by Willis O'Brien, who did the animation for King Kong. However, Harryhausen was O'Brien's assistant on this movie, and according to some sources, he's actually responsible for a lot of the animation, so I'm counting it. A young girl living in Africa named Jill finds a baby gorilla that she names Joe and raises it with her family. Years later, the gorilla grows to a huge size, but is tame and friendly. A show business promoter discovers Joe and convinces Jill to have her and Joe come back to the United States with him so he can use Joe as an attraction. Now, with the way I've described this movie so far, it probably sounds a lot like King Kong. In fact, this movie has the same director and producer as Kong, and they even got Robert Armstrong, the actor who played Carl Denham in King Kong, to be in this movie in a similar role. However, there are some important differences. First up is Joe's size. He's bigger than a normal gorilla, but he isn't nearly as big as King Kong. Second, right from the very beginning, Joe is meant to be an entirely sympathetic character that we identify with and feel sorry for. Now sure, Kong was sympathetic too, but let's be honest, he wasn't a total angel. I mean, he did kill people. Here, Joe's completely innocent. There is a scene where he goes on a rampage and wrecks a nightclub, but that's only because some drunks made him angry, and he doesn't kill anybody. Also, unlike most of the other movies on this list, this one really isn't a monster movie. It's more of a drama. In a way, it's kind of similar to something like E.T., where the supposed monster is actually friendly and needs protection from people who want to exploit and hurt him. The effects, while definitely crude by today's standards, are still effective. The animation gives Joe a variety of expressions and emotions that give him real personality and sympathy, and you stop thinking of him as a special effect and accept him as another character in the movie, which is a real testament to O'Brien and Harryhausen's talent and attention to detail. Willis O'Brien would go on to do a few more movies before his death, mostly B-movies like The Black Scorpion and The Giant Behemoth, but this is one of his last mainstream movies, so in a way it can be seen as a passing of the torch from one generation to the next. For a monster movie that you don't have to be a monster movie fan to like, Mighty Joyoung's a mighty good choice.
Am I dreaming? Or did I see a gorilla?
Number 3. The Golden Voyage of Sinbad. This was actually the second of 3 movies featuring the character of Sinbad that Harryhausen worked on, although aside from featuring Ray's effects, they're really not connected at all and you can watch them in any order. This time around, Sinbad's played by John Philip Law, who you may remember as Pygar from Barbarella. The story involves Sinbad going on a quest to obtain pieces of an artifact that would give the owner incredible power and riches, and trying to get them before an evil sorcerer called Kura. Kura is played by Tom Baker, who's best known for playing Doctor Who, so here's your opportunity to see what the Doctor would be like if he were a slimy bad guy.
Do you dare to defy the demons of darkness?
It also features Caroline Munro as the slave girl, Margiana. Alright, you get the idea. As always though, the real star of the show is Harryhausen's animation, and this movie has some of the strangest monsters Ray ever created. There's a ship's figurehead that comes to life, a griffin that comes right out of nowhere, a winged homunculus creature, and there's even a cyclops centaur. So, would that make it a Centclops? Centaur? I don't know. The highlight for me is when a statue of the Hindu goddess Kali comes to life and engages Sinbad's crew in a sword duel. It's one of the best pieces of animation Harryhausen ever did, animating each arm independently and lining it up perfectly with the live-action footage. Oh, and did I mention it dances?
Stop!
This movie was made towards the end of Harryhausen's career, and it was at a time when fantasy movies like this one were getting a bit more rare, but it still shows Ray operating at the top of his game. So for fantasy movie fans, I say check it out. Number 2, The Seventh Voyage of Sinbad. So we now go from the second Sinbad movie Harryhausen worked on to the first one, and it's my personal favorite of the bunch. In a lot of ways, the plot of this movie is pretty standard stuff for a fantasy movie. An evil wizard puts a spell on a princess, so Sinbad and his crew have to fight their way through a bunch of monsters and obstacles to save her. But this movie actually has a lot more going for it than other fantasy movies at the time. By far the movie's biggest asset is its pacing. This movie doesn't screw around. The action kicks off right away with the first monster appearing only a few minutes in, and it doesn't let up from there. This is a movie that knows to keep the monsters and action sequences coming fast and often, and it avoids the overly long setup that a lot of 50s monster movies have. Good thing too, because these are some of the best monsters and set pieces in Ray's entire filmography. Not only do we get several scenes with what is easily one of the best movie Cyclopses ever, there's also the two-headed rock, a fire-breathing dragon, and many others. Another asset is Bernard Herrmann's kick-ass musical score. This was the first Harryhausen movie to be made in color, and it really shows Ray's animation coming into its own. The highlight of the film is the duel with the skeleton. Not only is the animation on it great, but the way it matches up with the live-action photography is extremely well done too. This is a simple, old-fashioned fantasy movie, the kind of which you don't really see anymore, but it's a good one to watch on a rainy day when you want to feel like a kid again. And number 1, Jason and the Argonauts. This movie is considered by both fans and critics to be Harryhausen's masterpiece, and with good reason. Not only is it the best movie he was ever involved with, it also showcases him at the absolute peak of his craft. Simply put, the movie's a cinematic retelling of the classic Greek myth of Jason and his quest to find the Golden Fleece, and if you guess that he encounters a bunch of Harryhausen monsters along the way, well, you'd be right. Out of all the movies Harryhausen worked on, this is the one that feels the most epic. From the monsters, to the sets, to Bernard Herrmann's musical score and the scenes with the Greek gods, just about everything about this movie screams big. And it's one movie that really captures the feel of a Greek myth. A good comparison would be with the historical epics that were popular in the 50s and early 60s like Ben-Hur and Spartacus, except this movie has monsters, which means it's better. Yeah, that's right, I said it. The highlight of the film, and probably the highlight of Harryhausen's entire career, is the climactic fight with the skeletons. Harryhausen had to animate all 7 skeletons individually, and the sequence took him over 3 months to complete. 50 years later, it's still one of the most impressive pieces of stop-motion animation ever created. Although the skeletons are probably the most technically impressive, my favorite monster in the movie is probably the giant statue, Talos. He's one of the biggest monsters Ray ever created, and you really get a sense of his size just through the way he moves. It's a real testament to Ray's skill that he was able to give an emotionless statue a real sense of character. But what am I saying? All the monsters are good. Talos, the Hydra, the Harpies, the skeletons. Ray was really working overtime with this one. Even though Ray's animation is the main attraction as always, the rest of the movie is well crafted as well, and it makes sure that you're never bored even when there's no monsters on screen. It keeps your attention in between the set pieces, and this is what makes it a truly great and entertaining adventure movie and not just a special effects showcase. So that's Jason and the Argonauts. It's well directed, well paced, it's got a great soundtrack, and it contains some of Ray's finest animation. If you're a newcomer to Harryhausen and are wondering what all the fuss is about, this is the place to start. So there you have it, my own personal top 10 favorite Ray Harryhausen movies. Feel free and let me know what your favorites are, or just any memories of Ray Harryhausen in the comments below. Well, that's all for now. I don't have any jokes or snarky remarks or anything, so instead, I'll just leave you with this.
And as you can see, each head is flexible. And inside is a very complicated mechanism which enables you to pose the figure in a very unusual way, and it'll hold its pose as long as you take one picture of film.